All right, morning everyone. Hopefully we're all going well on a Friday morning. Long weekend for at least for us Queenslanders. I'm not sure for those that are south of the ditch or east of us whether you've got a long weekend this weekend. But I know most of us are pretty excited about the Monday off opportunity that's going to be in front of us the next couple of days. We're going to have a really good session today. It's going to be a nice, short, sharp session. We're going to be wrapped up pretty close to 9:30. We're going to focus on auction day strategy, some negotiation techniques as well that we've put into play that have worked pretty well for us across the last few years that might help us get some of those deals across the line, create some raving fans as well. But before we do that, just a couple of shout outs today. It's Penny Tarrant from our team's birthday. So a big happy birthday to Penny. I believe Penny's in Bali, I think. So Penny's not online this morning. She was going to log in from the beach there at Legion while she's getting a massage and getting her hair braided, but she didn't do that. So instead, we are here. And she is over there. So good on you, Penny. Happy birthday. Hope you have a great day. And also to our team that have been doing a whole lot of good work across the last couple of weeks. Well done. Quick plug we're going to give to our latest edition, which is our book for those that have bought a copy of this, which is our Ultimate Guide to Auctions, our hardcover edition. Hasn't quite popped up in the New York Times bestseller list yet, but it can't be too far away. To those that bought one, thank you so much. Again, it's most of the content that we do with our training has been encapsulated inside of this document. If you haven't bought one yet, you can head online to apolloauctions.com.au. You can follow all the links to our store, and you can pick up either an e-version or a hard copy version in there. And hopefully that's going to help you with your auction day strategy, but also listing auctions as well, making sure we all get what we want. So with that in mind, we're going to get straight to it. We're going to start talking about auction day strategies and how auction day itself works all the way through when we get to that piece of negotiating with our buyers. I think the first thing to start with is to talk about, and we spoke about this in the session with working with buyers, what's the really important things we have to do to make sure our buyers do what we need to do on the day, and how do we actually interact with them to get them to do that. The last piece that we said about that was making sure that on the morning of the auction, when the buyer wakes up and they're maybe feeling a little bit nervous or they're feeling like they're second guessing their decision, what will generally happen is if they feel any sort of emotion, that emotion will generally cause them to withdraw, pull back and not act. So what we want to do is try and counterbalance against that. So what we said in that session with working with buyers is it's really important that if you're working with buyers in the week leading up to the auction, the morning of the auction, wake up, send them a text message and say, hi, spoken to my sellers. They're so excited to sell you the property today. Good luck. So just that last bit of positive affirmation or positive reinforcement to the buyers to say, hey, you're going to be every chance to buy this today. So that last little thing can actually just be the little bit that just potentially gets you across the line and maybe just gives them a little bit of confidence to come along to hopefully start the bidding, which is clearly what we want them to do. And almost more important than that, to be the last bidder at the end of the day as well. So that's really crucial that we do that. Obviously, give your sellers a call as well first thing on the morning of the auction, because they're probably feeling nervous also. Give them a call and say, hey, woke up this morning thinking of you guys. We're here to deliver a really good outcome to you to potentially get you across the line. And the way you want to frame that up too with the sellers, and I always say this in the vendor meetings that I do, is to say to the sellers, look, just to strip away everything on auction day and all the strategy and everything that goes in behind it, just to recognize what our roles are. Myself as the auctioneer and my partner agent here, our job is very simple. That is to get the price as high as we can. Your job as the sellers is to simply say yes or no. And that's all it comes down to. So all you want to say is my job is to get the figure as high as I possibly can. Your job is to say yes or no. And that's what'll actually how it'll shake out. Because behind all the strategy and behind all the myths and behind all the consternation that goes into auction day, that's actually what happens. We furiously work as the auctioneer and the agent team. We furiously work to get the figure as high as we can. Eventually gets put in front of our seller, and our seller makes a simple yes or no decision whether they're prepared to sell the property and move on with their life. So that's the conversation we should be having with the seller. But make sure you give them a call, reinforce them the morning of, and say, hey, just thinking of you. I know it's going to be a big day for you. If it's been in the family a long time, maybe you're dealing with an estate sale where they're selling off their parents' property, then clearly be cognizant of that. So make sure that you do say, hey, I understand it's going to be a pretty tough and a pretty emotional day for you. Just want to let you know I'm here. There'll be no pressure coming from my side at all. All we're going to do is try and get you the best possible result. So just put a nice little bow on the end of the campaign, because then we're going to flick forward to actually dealing with the day itself. We get the question a lot, what do you need to have on display on auction day? So for those that maybe aren't that familiar with auctions, it's always pays to brush up on the legislation. By law, what you need to have on display is a copy of the contract for sale, a copy of the terms and conditions of auction, and a copy of your license number, and also the auctioneer who is facilitating the auction, their license number as well. So we generally send out the auction numbers on, Jessie, when do we send them out? Monday. Thank you, Jessie. Jessie's sitting right here furiously working away. She's guiding our technical difficulties today. So we send them out on a Monday. They're always available on a website as well. But just make sure you do have those on display in addition to your own personal license as well. But in terms of what you need to have on display, that's all that you need to have on display. And then you want to put any other paraphernalia, your open home brochures, the copy of the green guide, any other relevant information that will help your buyers along, make sure that's available there for them at the same point in time. So legally, once you've done that, you're all buttoned up and off we go. Then we talk about what's the best time to open the property. Look, the standard is half an hour before. I know some agencies have been experimenting with just 15-minute opens, just really little burst opens before the auction to try and harness that activity in the last 15 minutes. Not a bad way to go. I'm not a big fan of opening the property for an hour beforehand. The only exception to that is maybe if it's an acreage property and you need people to have a bit more time to stroll around the grounds, or if it's a really big home to be able to go through it fully. But realistically, the people you're going to get turning up on the day are either there to buy the property, in which case they've probably been through before, or they're only there for a bit of a research to see what it actually goes for. So I'm a fan of the 15-minute open or the half an hour open, just to condense that last bit of information so they're there and ready to go. So once we've done that, how do we then handle our sellers throughout the period of that? Look, I think that the best thing you can do is tell your sellers to leave once the open for inspection starts, and get them to come back just 5 minutes before the auction. So preordain where you're going to meet them, preordain how that's going to take place. And what you'll say to the sellers is to say, look, we find that the buyers are more comfortable if they know the seller's not inside the property. So I'd suggest you guys go for a walk, jump in the car. If you've got some dogs, make sure you take the dogs along with you as well. Go down somewhere, come back at 5 minutes before the auction, meet us in the front study, and we'll sit there and we'll give you a final wrap up on where we're at. The reason why you want to do that, and the reason why you want to see the sellers again just before you start the auction, is that it's no point formulating an auction strategy when you don't know what's happening. And this is sometimes the problem that we have with vendor meetings. Is vendor meetings are all hypothetical. So we think this is going to happen, or we think this bid is going to register, or we think this bid is going to bid to this level. 5 minutes before the auction, it's pretty much all cards on the table. And at that point, then you'll know exactly what's likely to transpire. So what you can say to the sellers is, look, in that 5 minute meeting just before the auction starts, we will sit down, we'll let you know exactly how many registrations we have. At that point, then we'll finalize our strategy around where do we kick it off, where do we run it to, all those sort of figures. But there's no point us doing that now because we don't know how many registrations we're going to have. So we've pre-framed that up, we've set that up, excuse me for a second. We've pre-framed that up, we've set that up, we've made sure our sellers are in touch with that, send them away for a walk, send them away for a bit of maybe a cigarette to go calm the nerves if that's what they like, but bring them to come back 5 minutes before, preordain where they're going to meet you, so the front study, the bedroom, wherever they're going to be watching the auction from, and say, look, we'll tuck you guys in there 5 minutes before the auction, have that final conversation, and then off we go. Now, generally, the auctioneer will use a 5 minute call or a 5 minute warning, which is a reminder that you must be registered prior to placing any bids, and they'll let everyone know where the auction is going to be. So in a perfect world, what you want to do is you want to make sure that the auctioneer does that, and then immediately after that, the auctioneer walks in and has that meeting with the sellers. Because that means that they'll direct most of the foot traffic out to where the auction is going to be, which in most cases, in the climate we've got in Queensland, it's going to be outside on the deck area or something that's a major living space. So all the crowd will start to move there, which means then the bedroom or the front study will be free for you to go and meet the sellers and do that. Plus, that's the last little push for, I guess, a little reminder for registrations. So once we've got to that point and we're right at that 11th hour prior to the auction starting, you should have a pretty good idea on what's likely to unfold. So you've probably got a pretty good idea on how many registered bidders that you have. Now, one thing that's critically important, and we see this a lot, and the auctioneers who are online will sure back me up on this, it's so important that you understand the impact that you have on your seller's emotions. So if you're 5 minutes before the auction and you're nervous or you're frantic or you're, oh, this guy hasn't turned up, I'm going to go out the front and give him a call on the mobile at 1 minute to 11 on the driveway, you're sending a message to the seller that, hey, this is not going to plan. And that's a scary, scary message for someone who's about to entrust their greatest asset into you and have no control over what's going to happen. So if your buyer isn't there by 1 to 11, chances are they're not coming. And that can be a hard thing to say, but chances are if they've had 4 weeks to get to the property and they've left it to 1 minute to 11 and they're not answering their phone or the phone's going to message bank, chances are they've discarded the property and they haven't had the courage to let you know. So what you want to say to your sellers is, look, if no buyers there at say 10-2, I'll be calling the buyers at that point. But beyond that point, we have to assume that they're not coming. And that comes into our strategy then. Because if you start to send off smoke signals to your seller that, hey, this isn't going to plan, I thought I was going to have 4, I've now got 2, or I thought I was going to have 5, and now I've got 3, or I thought I was going to have 2, and now I have 1, this is not good. The seller picks up on that energy, and that's actually then what will manifest itself out there. So don't underestimate the impact of the energy that you have on your sellers. You need to be the duck. So even if your legs are going at 1,000,000 miles an hour and your heart's beating and you're feeling nervous, you have to appear calm, because it's going to be your calm, nervous energy, or your calm energy, I should say, that's actually going to control the seller's nervous energy. So make sure that that's the attitude that we take into that final meeting. So what we want to do then is we want to sit down with the seller. And prior to this point, we get a question a lot about how should I actually work in with my bidders on the day. The best case scenario of what you can do is ideally you as the listing agent shouldn't be assigned to a particular buyer. So what I'll explain what I mean by that is if you have 2 buyers and you think they're both going to be there and you think they're both going to be bidding, the best thing you can do is when they get there, take their registration and just say, look, just for the purpose of the auction itself, I'm going to be tied up with the seller for most of that time. So here's Jesse. I'd love you to meet Jesse. Jesse will be here to give you a hand with your bidding to hopefully get you across the line. Now, if we get into a negotiation, I'll jump back involved with you at that point, but Jesse will be the person that probably steers you throughout the actual bidding process. Why that's so important is because if you pick the wrong horse, so let's say you've got 3 registered bidders and you say, well, I'm going to go with this bidder, but then all of a sudden this bidder ends up being your strongest prospect, you've alienated that bidder because you've actually assigned yourself to a different bidder. So it's better to have members of your team there, which means then when you get to the point of actually the highest bidder has revealed themselves, then you can step in and jump in. One of the things that really makes my skin crawl, and I know it's been a thing that's been done at auctions for even when Moses was back doing auctions back when, is the agent that goes to one bidder and goes, can you give me another 5, give me another 5, give me another 5, okay, thank you. And they shoot straight across the room to the other bidder and they say, can you give me another 5, can you give me another 5, can you give me another 5? We come from a place, unfortunately, as agents where we're distrusted, and that sort of activity breeds that distrust. Well, hang on. You just came into our sacred circle, tried to influence a life-changing decision that we were going to make, only to take our money, put it out on the floor, and then shoot straight across the room to our biggest competitor and do exactly the same for them. It's a really poor look. So what you want to do is assign the agents to individual bidders. You're there just merely to facilitate the negotiation when that takes place. But more importantly, you're there to float around and make sure there's no issues, but also be the conduit to your sellers. So assign individual agents to the bidders. Don't pick one yourself. Same as if you've got a phone bidder. If you've got a phone bidder, your time is better invested coaching up one of your staff to be on the phone and eliciting bids from the phone bidder than to be on your phone yourself. Because as soon as you're on the phone, you are disengaged from every other thing that's happening at that auction. And the auction is your rock show. And I know it's one of my favorite expressions to always say that when we're representing an agent, so if you're the agent, you're the lead singer in the rock show or the lead singer in the band. As the auctioneer, I'm just the drummer. So we want to make sure that you as the lead agent are engaged with every single person that's at that auction. That's your bidders, that's your sellers, that's your potential listings that are going to come off the back of this one. If you're on the phone to one buyer, you've disengaged from every other single person there. Plus the message you've sent to the other buyers is, well, I'm going to work with this buyer because I think they're better than the rest of you guys. So that should be a starting point. That should be a starting point for us. So then once we get into that meeting with the sellers, we want to sit down and want to formulate what our strategy is going to be. So for those states, which is Queensland, New South Wales, that have registrations of bidders, good work. For those states that don't have registration of bidders, you are crazy. We should be writing constant letters, daily letters to your REI bodies to say, bring registration in. It is just beneficial for every single party. It's beneficial for you. You know how many registered bidders you've got. Beneficial for the seller. They know how many parties are there. Plus, they've got protection over buyers who leave. And it's beneficial to buyers because they know they're competing against someone else who exists and is live and is there. So we're going to work on the assumption that we're in the smart states and we've got registration of bidders that are there. So let's work on worst case scenario first, which is you have no registered bidders. Now, this happens, and it actually happens more frequently than people realise. again, this is probably the most crucial one where your energy has to be still upbeat and buoyant, because if you're down in the dumps and you're kicking cans and no, do you want to register? No. Oh, okay. Right. Do you want to? No. Oh, okay. Your seller feeds off that. So you've got to make sure, if you have sold the seller on the fact that this is a 3-stage process and auction is only one stage of that 3-stage process, then you can't act like your world has fallen in because one simple stage hasn't gone exactly to plan. So if you've got no registered bidders, there's 3 outcomes. And this is the dialogue that we will use with sellers. And I'll actually get Mark McCabe's on here. So Mark's one of our fantastic auctioneers who probably does down the Gold Coast. So Mark is there. I'll get Mark to be the seller and the role play of this. Mark, if you don't mind, we'll see if we can get him unmuted. See if I can unmute him. I think Mark might have muted himself. But anyway, looks like, Mark, I'm going to have to be doing your role today. It's just going to be me doing it with myself, which will be a lot of fun. Oh, there we go. We got you, Mark.
Hello. Hello, hello.
Oh, Mark's still out there in the ether. Okay. So let's talk about this for the seller. So we're going to go inside to the seller and we're going to say, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, look, at this point, we have no registered bidders for today's auction. It's not plan A, but it's the card that we've got in front of us, the cards we've got dealt. So we're going to try and work with it as best we can to set it up for the post-auction buyers who are either going to be here or going to be absent after. So there's 3 strategies that we have when there's no registered bidders.
Hello.
Number 1 is we open the auction up and we place a vendor bid. So the reason that we would do that is to give everyone here an idea on where the property sits potentially post-auction. Now, the only time I would ever recommend this strategy is, number 1, if you obviously have no registered bidders. Number 2, if you have no one there that is ready to make an offer immediately after. Number 3, if the seller's selling instructions that you've got are absolutely red hot and on the money. That's the only strategy to put that out there. So the second strategy is one that we open it up. So we ask for an opening bid, knowing that no one's going to bid. We then don't place a vendor bid to not influence anyone out there in the market. We then pass the property with no bidding and we go straight to negotiating after with any conditional parties. So that's option 2. Option 2, exactly the same, open it up, don't place a vendor bid, and go forward. The reason why we wouldn't place a vendor bid in most cases is because you don't want to influence the market to tell them what they should be paying. What you want to do, particularly if you have a conditional buyer that is ready to make an offer after the auction, is pass the property with no bidding, go straight to post-auction negotiation without throwing a figure out there that represents your seller.
Hello.
The danger you have in placing a vendor bid when you've got no registered bidders, you go too high, or you scare everyone away, or you go too low, and people are going to scale back their offers. So that would be my suggestion. Suggestion number 3 would be that we
thanks, Jamie.
Don't open it up. We just make an announcement, something on the lines of, look, at this stage, we have no registered bidders. At this stage, what we do have is an awful lot of conditional interest. And what we're going to do simply is go straight to post-auction negotiation with those parties. So the advantage of actually not doing that or not opening up the bidding is you don't get that awkward situation where everyone's looking at each other going, why is no one bidding? Why is no one participating? So that's generally my preferred strategy because it just allows you to control the message a little bit easier. It also allows you to actually put out there what is going to happen from this point forward while still not influencing the market post-auction. So your 3 strategies again, open it up, place a vendor bid, open it up, don't place a vendor bid, don't open the auction up, just simply make an announcement saying most of our interest has come in that it's post-auction. We're just going to simply go straight forward to negotiating with that with those parties. Again, I like that last one because it just feels more like, hey, this is just part of what happens sometimes. This is nothing new or unusual that's taking place. We're just going to simply go to negotiate with those parties. So that's if we've got no registered bidder. If we have one registered bidder, what is critically important is you have a conversation with that registered bidder just before the auction starts. Because if you don't tell them they're the only registered bidder, they're going to work it out on their own, and then that's going to be a very difficult conversation to manage. Whereas again, it's very much about getting on the front foot and telling the registered bidder why it's so advantageous that they're the only person that's here that is registered. So the conversation goes, Mark, are you there? Can we see if we got Mark?
Yes, yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I think everyone else can hear Mark, but I can't. That's okay. So Mark, we're not going to role play with you today, but thank you very much for making yourself available all the same. So what we're going to say to our one registered is we're going to say, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, look, I've got some really good news for you. You're the only person holding one of those panels. And they will go, oh, Oh, okay. So that's actually a really good spot. What we have is people that are here ready to buy the property after the auction, but in terms of the next 10 or 15 minutes, it's just you. So what I would recommend to you is this. If you can start us off with an opening bid, doesn't matter what figure you like, any figure you like to kick us off, all that'll allow us to do is to not vendor bid against you, pause the auction, take you aside, let you know where the seller will sell you the property, and then you can make an informed decision from that. Really simple dialogue, really effective dialogue, and most people are going to respond positively. If they respond negatively, so if they say, look, we're just going to hold back and wait then you want to say to them, okay, do you mind if I ask what you're waiting for? Because if you hold back and wait, what's going to happen is we'll have no option but to pass the property in because you're the only registered bidder. Then the conditional buyer is going to enter into your conversation. So right now, the situation that you're in is the only registered bidder. All that you have to do is satisfy the seller. That's it. And then you'll buy the home. Post-auction, then you have to not only satisfy the seller, but you also have to beat competition. So you actually just add an extra task to what you have to do to buy the property. Right now, you've got one task and one task only. That's to reach an agreement with the seller. And if we can do that, property sold to you. So pre-frame that up. And again, doesn't matter where they start. Any figure they like, all we'll do is position them for that negotiation. I'm not a fan of vendor bidding against one bidder. I don't think it's the best way to get them to buy the property. You know, they start at 5, I go to 6, they go to 7, I go to 8, and then they all of a sudden pull out the bidding, and then we're stuck because we can't negotiate with them. Better strategy, get them to start off with an opening bid. Any figure they like, we'll simply pause it, we'll take them aside, and we'll start negotiating with them from that point. If you have multiple registered bidders, then it becomes more about the strategy on where do we look to start the bidding if no one starts, where do we pull out of the bidding, et cetera, et cetera. As a general rule, and again in Queensland, as many vendor bids as you like. In New South Wales, you only get one. My general rule is you don't want to place more than one, possibly 2 at the absolute maximum of vendor bids. I know in Western Australia, they have 10 vendor bids. That is their legal allowance. Who picked 10, I have no idea. But 10 seems like a crazy number. I can't think of a circumstance where you'd be placing 10 vendor bids. But 1, maximum 2 vendor bids. Generally, the vendor bid is just starting to start things off. So Mr. and Mrs. Seller, we have 3 registered bidders for today's auction, which is great. What we're going to do is we're going to try and look for them to start it. If they don't, I'll place a vendor bid at, say, 600 just to get things going. Now, the reason why I'm going to place it at 600 is because what we rely on here is momentum, and I want to make sure that all our bidders give it an incentive to start bidding. So to work on some figures here, hopefully everyone can see the board behind me. What you want to be working on, so let's say for argument's sake, you have a reserve of 850. What we want to work on is the feedback levels that we've had. So let's say we've had actually most of the feedback has been around the mid-7s, which is pretty common. Then we'll look to start it at 600 because what we want to do is we want to land inside of our feedback range on about our 3rd or 4th bid. So we want to increase the competition to get that 3rd or 4th bid to be landing inside of that feedback range. So the really important thing around that is to say to your sellers, the opening bid is not as important as the jumps that we go in. Because we can start this thing at 200 grand, but if we go in 200 grand jumps, we're in our feedback level, our feedback zone inside of 3 bids. Alternatively, we can start this thing at 700, but we go in 5s, and it's going to take us 10 bids to get inside of that zone. So just say that to the sellers. The opening bid is really irrelevant. It doesn't matter. What is important is the jump that we go in immediately after the opening bid. That is more important. So it's not where it starts, always where it finishes. I know there's a whole lot of little catchy sayings out there like kick it low, watch it go, all that kind of thing. I don't think you want to start at a ridiculous level, but I definitely think you want to start at a conservative level, aiming to be in your feedback zone on the 3rd bid. So if we start at 600, what I would say to the sellers is I'm going to try and go to 650 immediately, but understand that I'll always take half of what I'm asking for. So if I'm the auctioneer and I'm at the front saying, okay, we start away now at $600,000, do we see a 50 rise anywhere? Take me north to go to 50. I'll be prepared to accept 25, but not less than 25. Because if we go in 10s, it's a long way home. If we go in 25s, it's still not ideal, but it's not that far away. We're only 6 bids away from getting into where we need to be. But the thing you need to forget when you set your starting figure is your reserve. The reserve is the most irrelevant figure when it comes to auction strategy. What is more important is the level at which you've had your buyer feedback. That's more important. And if you've had offers on the property, I would never be starting the auction off at a level that is higher than the lowest offer. That should be our starting point. Because the dialogue the auctioneer can use then is to say, well, look, we've had offers higher than this level. We're happy to start it here and let's see what happens post that. But make sure you run that through with your seller. All we're trying to do with this and with the predominant way that auctions are running in most cases is all we're trying to do is to get our first or our highest or our best bidder to separate themselves away from everybody else. Because what's going to happen at 99.98% of auctions at the moment is there's going to be the pause, which means buyers have reached here, sellers want here, and this is the gap in between that we've got to then close. So all we want to do is get to that situation where our best bidders identified themselves, we pause the auction, we've taken them aside, and off we go. So how do we handle that negotiation? Well, that's probably a pretty good thing to talk about, and negotiation strategies that can be applied across to private treaty as well, but most of these we use on the floor with an auction. So the first negotiation tip that I always give is to say, you need to address the issue first. So whoever your issue is, that's who you need to go to first and start addressing them. So in this case here, let's say we do get bidding to 750. So our auction activity has replicated what's happened in the marketing prior to the campaign. We've got to the mid-sevens, which is the level where most of the information and feedback and offers have been, but our seller is still sitting at 850. Who we need to go to first there is to go to the seller and look to them to address their figure. Because if I go to the buyers first and ask them to increase, I'm sending a message to my seller that, hey, you're not the issue here, the buyers are, which reaffirms their high position. So what I'm going to say is to the buyers, I'm going to take the buyers inside, and I'm going to go to the buyers and say, look, at this stage, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the seller, I'm going to get their permission to let you know their expectations, and I'll come back and let you know how that sits. Then we march off to the seller. So I go inside of the seller and I say, look, Mr. Seller, good news is we've reached the level where the feedback has been at 750. What would you like to do? And then we just simply shut up. We pause, we shut up, and we listen. Because you want to give your sellers a chance to express and talk through what they're feeling at that time. If you fill that space with words over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, what you'll do is not give them a chance to actually react. So chances are at 750, they're going to say to me, no, look, we'll hang on to it. We'll rent it out. We're not going to sell it at that. Okay. What I'm going to do is go and have a chat to the buyers now. Look, I think that the buyers, based on the bidding activity, are starting to run out of steam. But let me go and have a conversation with them and see what I can do. The question I'd like to ask you at this point is, the 850 figure that's written on paper, is that set in stone, or is there any flexibility off that? Flexibility is a really nice soft word. You know, it's not ask you to reduce your reserve, it's just a word that's flexibility, which is a little bit softer. Oh, look, if it got into the early eights, we'd probably consider it. Okay, look, I'm going to go and ask them for your plan A price at the moment, and I'll come back to you immediately after that. So then the next move is whether we go to the buyers and ask them for the 850 figure. Some agencies that we work with like to ask them for a figure higher than the reserve to give ourselves room to maneuver. If that's your strategy, that's fine. Whatever's going to work best for you. Generally, I like to give yourself a little bit of room to maneuver, so I might go to the buyers and ask them for 870. Because the worst thing that I can do is to walk inside to a buyer and say, if you get to 850, the property will come on the market, and they say, great. And then we know we've left money on the table. So what I'm going to do is go to the buyer and say, look, good news, the sellers will sell you the property today at 870. Or they'll sell the property today at 870. Now, chances are in this instant here, the buyer is going to go, oh, no way. No way. Nah, we're out. Okay. Well, just understand that reserve price is generally a figure that the sellers would love to achieve. And then usually there's a figure beneath that they're prepared to move on at. I don't know what that figure is. They probably don't know what that figure is until we actually arrive at that figure. So that's a conversation that you can actually pre-frame up. So even if they say that figure is ridiculous, you can always wind it back and have the conversation. So what you want to say is this. Look, my instructions are really clear today. The property is definitely for sale at 870. The property is definitely not for sale at 750. Everything in between those two is a maybe. How close to that figure can you get me? And I would generally, depending on who the seller are, I would generally write it actually on the piece of paper. So I would draw 870 at the top. I'll write it on here. I'll use the red, see if that stands out a little bit more. So I would write 870 here at the top, and I would say they will sell it at 870 and put a tick next to it. They definitely won't sell the property at 750, put a cross next to it. Everything in between is a maybe. How close to that 870 can you get me? Now, I assume that they're not going to jump to 870 or 850 instantly. They're probably, if they're around that 750 figure, they might give you another 10 or another 20. What is critically important, though, is your language and your body language when the seller or the buyer do something. So if the buyer says to me 760 and I go, great, and I'll go have a chat to the seller, the message I'm sending to the buyer straight away is, well, you're actually going to be a chance at 760. So if the buyer says to me 760, what I want to say is, look, I'll go and take it to the seller because I have to do that. I just don't think it's going to be enough to buy the property. But let me go and have a chat to them and I'll come straight back to you. So what you've already done is pre-framed up the seller, or pre-framed up the buyer, I should say, that you're going to have to come back and ask them for more money. Whereas if you skip out of there at 760 with a big smile on your face, you know, yip day, all the skipping all the way, then you're actually sending a message saying you're probably going to get it, and I'm not going to come back and ask you for more money. So then I go inside of the seller and I say, well, good news, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, they've increased up to 760. What would you like me to do? Pause, shut up, let them respond. They're going to say, we're not going to accept 760. Okay, what I need to do now is I need to go back to them a figure that is more around their level. So where do they need to get to today, bearing in mind this is a cash unconditional contract to get it across the line? Now, at this point here, you're probably going to hope for their biggest adjustment because cash offers in front of them, they had all the feedback, all the information, etc. So they might then go down to the low eights. So they've come off the 850 figure and they've said, look, 810 and we'll sell the property. Again, your language at this point is really important. So what you want to say to them is, look, my concern is that no one has spoken an 8 in this whole campaign, and this buyer's certainly not talking they're going to get there either. I'm going to go back in there and see what I can do for you to see where I can get them to, but I think that there might have to be some further adjustment required. So again, I've pre-framed up before I've actually left the room that, hey, 810 is not going to happen, but I'm going to go and try, but it's not going to happen, so you're going to have to think about things again. So that means is when I leave the room, the conversation that's going to be taking place inside the room is, well, where would we adjust to? Rather than the conversation being, oh yeah, 810, that'll do, that'll get us a new car, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And then I go off to the buyer again and I might want to build myself a bit of room. So I might say to the buyer, look, good news is they've adjusted their expectations from 870 down to 830. Can you get us there? No, we're not going to get to 830. Okay. What we want to do now at this point is dangle the threat that's behind the sale to the buyer, but then not dangle it in an aggressive way that's going to get their back up. So say to the buyer, look, the catch-22 for the seller right now is, do they sell the property to you cash unconditional, or do they roll the dice and go post-auction with people that are talking figures that are north of this but carry inherent risk? Now, they've made a decision that they don't want to do that. They made a decision they want to sell the property today. That's what they've said to me all along. But that's the catch-22 that's in their mind. So we need to get closer to their figure for them to be prepared to take the risk of not taking the risk post-auction and potentially leaving money on the table. So where can you get us to? Look, we'll make them one final offer. We're at 760 now. We'll go one final offer to 780, but that is it. Ever heard that before from a buyer? 780, but that is categorically us. We're out. So then I march back off to the seller and I say, I've got some good news. If they've gone to 780, they've indicated to me that as their final offer, what would you like to do? And that process repeats themselves again. Now, if the seller continually holds their ground, some dialogue tips that might help you. Number one is to reinforce the campaign information. So Mr. and Mrs. Seller, just for a reference point, we've had 42 inspections in this property. We've had 12 second inspections. We've had 2 building and pests. We've had 2 valuations. We've got 3 registered bidders here today. And this is the figure we've arrived at. Now, I'd be more bullish if I knew there was someone that was sitting in my back pocket that was saying, post-auction, we're going to pay 800 conditionally. But the reality is we don't have that person. Right now, the drop-off is if we don't accept 780, we go down to our next buyer who is $740,000. That's a 40 grand drop-off. That's a pretty steep shelf. And my concern is if we lose this buyer, that's actually going to be the reality that faces us. Now, I know you said 810, but I want you to think about it this way. What you're doing is you're risking $780,000 to potentially make 30. Now, as an investment strategy, I wouldn't advise that's a very wise one. Now, even if you said yes to 780, I'm going to go back and try and get you more, but I need you to understand this is a really critical decision because the number of sellers that we sit in front of and have this decision and they regret it post-auction or further down the line when they don't sell is massive. So what would you like us to do? So even if they roll to 780, and look, they're not going to roll to 780 that easily, but for the purpose of getting everyone off the training this morning, we're going to speed up the negotiation. If they say yes to 780, it is our job to go back and ask the buyer for one more bite of the cherry. Because if you can create a referral zone, so let's say we get an agreement at 780, but I want to go back and I'm going to ask the buyer for another 10 or another 15 or another 20. Even if you can get another 5, the lingering taste in your seller's mouth will be, well, gee, even when we sold the property, Jesse or Mark or Justin, they went back and got another 5,000 for us. You know, they really actually cared about getting us the best result, not just stopping when we agreed at their price. So don't ever lose sight of the fact that our job is to hunt down and find the best price for your seller. Even if you've got an agreement between the two parties, you want to go back and ask the buyer one more time for another 10, another 20, something more just to try and get it across the line. You know, critically important that we do that. That referral zone is going to be your next listing. That's going to be them telling their friend or their neighbor or someone to say, yeah, we really liked Mark. You know, Mark did a really good job for us. He even got us a little bit more when we thought we'd sold the property already. And that's going to be a really, really crucial part to get it over and across the line. So those negotiation tips, again, just if you're taking notes, number 1 is always address the issue first. Number 2 is leave your emotion out of it. So you're the unemotional party. Number 3 is make sure that you address the content that's said by the buyer or the seller. So if they tell you an overpriced figure, don't march out of the room and accept it and off you go. Always leave them thinking about what their next move is going to be. And number 4 is make sure that you always fight for that referral zone. That's really, really critically important. So those strategies can obviously be applied to private treaty as well. We call auctions private treaty on speed because the negotiation gets sped up to 10 or 15 minutes, whereas in a private treaty, you know, you're driving between the houses. It can take a little bit more time than that. So there's some techniques and some strategies that might help us come auction day. But the other thing I wanted to say around this is that our auctioneers are always available. So if ever you want to talk through auction day strategy, talk through dialogue, talk through negotiation techniques, just pick up the phone and we're more than happy to help you out in any way that we possibly can. So that's going to wrap us up this morning. Thanks again for jumping on this morning. If you have got any questions, feel free to linger around, type them in and we'll address them as we can. Our next session is 26th of October, Friday the 26th of October. We are going to be covering off, I think, reserve sets and post-auction strategy as well. At that point, if you haven't booked in for launch 2018, make sure you do that. $45, all proceeds going to charity. We've got a brilliant lineup. We've got Tom Hector, Tom McGlynn, Karuna Dimolo, and I'm going to forget the last 2 speakers, how embarrassing, Sonia Trelaw and Shane Brocklebank from Professionals of Wellington. It's going to be a really good day at Cloudland, just across the road, actually, here at Cloudland, Friday, November the 2nd. So again, through our website, you can grab tickets for that. It's going to be a really good day. But thanks again, guys, for jumping on, and have a good weekend. Good luck. Cheers.